Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 topics I'm here to share if you know one of my top 10 list videos to share with you guys today. And I kind of serve up as a follow-up video to my tier list ranking of my favorite Mario games that I've actually played. I thought it'd be cool to kind of go into my all-time favorite non-PlayStation console, which just so happens to be the Nintendo 64, which, yes, I still have mine in its box. Still love it. Got it when I was 7, and I've been holding on to it ever since. And I just thought I would just go down and just name the top 10 of my favorite games I ever played on this console. So if you happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to track me on my future videos. And remember, if you guys have any ideas for future rankings or reviews, or discussion videos, or reactions, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll try to get them up as soon as I can. And before I begin, I would just like to put this message out right now that Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask is not on this list. I did not play either of these two games. I've only ever played 3 Zelda games in my life, which was Link to the Past, Oracle of Seasons, and Oracle of Ages on the Game Boy Color, and that is it. I never got around to playing either of the 2 main Zelda games on the Nintendo 64. Don't ask me why. I just never got around to it. I know that a lot of people would put those 2 games, 1 or 2 of those games on their list, or even consider Ocarina of Time the greatest Nintendo 64 game of all time, if not the greatest game that they've ever played. I understand that, but heck, it is not on my list. So, with that out of the way, let's start off with what is number 10 on my list. Starting off with number 10 is probably the most inappropriate game that I could have played as a child, and that is going to have to go to Conker's Bad Fur Day. This is kind of one of the rare examples where my parents were really paying attention to the rating of certain games, so they got it for me. And I'm kind of glad that they weren't paying attention to the ratings at those time, because, man, Conker's Bad Fur Day is really one of the probably most wackiest games that has, like, adult themes that kids shouldn't be playing, but so many of us did. And it's just so iconic. I think Conker is really one of the most unappreciated characters that came out during that period of time, and just kind of the toilet humor and the jokes and just all the craziness of the game kind of reminded me a little bit of South Park, but even more disgusting in some senses. A lot of people really enjoyed this game. I enjoyed this game as a kid. It didn't have the greatest gameplay, but I just thought that the humor and fun factor that it had certainly made it one of the best times I've had while playing Nintendo 64, which is why I'm happy to make it number 10 on my list. Going into number 9, I'm going to have to go with Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Now, Shadows of the Empire had its own brand, and this was really one of the premier games that kind of showed the power of the Nintendo 64 at the time it was released. In fact, I do believe it's actually one of the main games that is actually shown off on the box, so it was something that they were really proud to show off. Now, I think that it's probably one of the better adventure Star Wars games. It has different styles of gameplay, as you can, take control of ships, you can take control of turrets, there's a driving section, there's running and gunning scenes with Dash Rendar. It introduced my favorite Star Wars ship of all time in the form of the Outlander. So Shadows of the Empire was really big in the mid 90s, and it had its own brand, had its own toy line, had its own novel, so it was a big deal back in the day. The only issue that I would say it still holds is that the controls are just a little off. It makes it a little bit difficult game to keep, but I do think that the overall length, story it's trying to tell, and just the vastness of what it was trying to do, it was a very ambitious game. It just wasn't perhaps the best program for, and therefore it's a little frustrating to play. But it's something that I really enjoyed as a kid. There's still a lot of things about it that I really enjoyed, and this was probably the most amount of Star Wars when this game came out that we would get before the prequels would come out, I believe a couple years later, because I think this game came out, I believe, in 96 or 97, and I think the episode 1 came out in 99. So like this was like a preview in preparation for the new era of Star Wars that would officially make me a fan. But I would say that my fandom for Star Wars really started with this game, which is why I have to add Shadows of the Empire as number 9 on my list. Going into number 8, I have to go with Mario Kart 64. You can't go wrong with Mario Kart. Mario Kart started on the Super NES, and it has continued all the way to today. It is still one of the most played racing games of all time, if not, some people consider one of the greatest racing games of all time. You can't go wrong with Mario Kart. You know what to expect. You pick your character, you pick your carts, you go on these crazy tracks, you start hitting these little boxes with weapons, and you just try to race your way and fight your way to the beginning. It's a classic title. It never loses its touch on how old it gets. You can't go wrong with Mario Kart, which is why I just had to add Mario Kart 64 as number 8 on my list. Now, as much as I like Mario Kart 64, there was another racing game in the Nintendo realm that I enjoyed just a little bit more, and that has to go to Diddy Kong's Racing. Now, I think the primary reason why Diddy Kong's Racing is a little bit more enjoyable for me personally is that it does everything that Mario Kart did, but I think it had a little bit more of it had a plot, and it had more of an adventure feel to it, in the sense that you would pick a character, you would actually have to win races that would gain you access to higher races, and there was like a boss for different areas. So I think that it had the variety, it had the combat, it had the different vehicles, it had the great set of characters. Some characters are even from other games. I believe even Conker's in this game. I think this was the first game that we actually see Conker. I may be wrong on that, but this was the first time that my memory that I remember seeing Conker in this game. I'm sure he's in this game with a bunch of other characters from other Nintendo games, which don't get the recognition that they deserve. And I think this is like the main game that really focuses on Diddy Kong, because everyone likes to focus on Donkey. So I like that Diddy Kong actually kind of gets his own game that stands out. But this was just a blast to play. I played it countless times. Had a lot of fun. Loved playing with my friends. I love playing with 4 people, which, you know, again, that was a big thing back in the 90s with the Nintendo 64. And it's just a blast to play. I like it just a little bit more than Mario Kart, which is why I have to put it as number 7 on my list. Going on with number 6 is probably my favorite racing game, not only on the Nintendo 64, but I would easily say it's probably one of my top 5 favorite racing games of all time, and that has to go to Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Now, a lot of people did not like Episode 1. A lot of people did not like the pod racing scene from Episode 1. Well, I am not one of those people. I had a blast with the pod racing scene. I mean, I was 9 years old at the time, so I guess it was geared more towards me. And because of that, I had a blast playing Episode 1 Racer. This is definitely one of the best racing games I've ever played. I love how you get to go on all these different tracks, on different planets. You can custom, you can upgrade your pod racer. There's a great collection of different pod racers in different styles. You actually have to worry about repairing certain things when you take damage. You actually have to go to Watu and get better parts to improve the performance. You actually have to tune the performance of your pod racer to kind of adapt to certain races. So sometimes you kind of want one that can turn a little bit better. Some things you gotta kind of reduce your own speed. There's just so many different elements that this was probably one of the first racing games that had an in-depth customized system that required you to actually kind of get a feel for your pod racer, to actually understand your track. I mean, it wasn't so much to know your track, it was the best pod racer in order to get around your track and maneuver and know secret passageways and shortcuts and all these different elements. And even one pod racer, which I thought was kind of unfair, it actually had weapons. There was only one pod racer that had weapons. I'm not going to say whose pod racer it was, but just use all these different elements just made it one of the best, just enjoyable racing games I've ever played. And that still stands up to this day. So much so that I think they did re-release it, I think on the PlayStation 5 or 4, and I did pick it up, play it again, and I had a blast with it. I believe it's PlayStation 4. Yes, it was PlayStation 4. I got it again, played it again, had a blast with it. I'm glad I get to revisit it. Easily, my favorite racing game on the Nintendo 64, without a doubt, which is why I gotta give it a number 6 spot on my list. Alright, now we're entering the top 5. Now things are gonna get a little bit serious and perhaps a little bit more predictable. But number 5 on my list has to go to Pokemon Stadium 2. Now, some people might pick Pokemon Stadium 1, but from my experience, I don't really think Pokemon Stadium was really all too different from Pokemon Stadium 1. It just added the Johto Pokemon, so you had like 251 Pokemon that you had access to. And personally, I think that the Kanto and Johto regions at that period of time is Pokemon at its best, at least for me, or at least I consider Johto like my all-time favorite region for Pokemon. So to have a Pokemon Stadium game and include the Johto Pokemon is just an instant win. So that's why it's number 5 on my list. You can never go wrong with Pokemon Stadium. You can never go wrong. I mean, it was pretty much all the fun Pokemon battle without having to go to all these crazy different. Well, I mean, there was like a system that was kind of like gyms, but it wasn't quite like that. But it was just a fun battle game for Pokemon. You can't go wrong with Pokemon Stadium, which is why it's number 5 on my list. Specifically, Pokemon Stadium 2. I want to make that clear. So that's why it's number 5 on my list. Going into number 4, an iconic battle franchise. You can never go wrong with Super Smash Brothers. It is still being played to this day. Specifically, even the N64 version is still being played to this day. I mean, that's just how incredible this game was at the time. We'd never, as far as I can recall, there had never been a battle game like this up to this point, where you had to deal with all these different characters from all these different Nintendo franchises. You put them in one game and you have them battle to see who's going to come out on top. This game was very fun to play if you were playing by yourself. It was even better if you get 3 other friends, so the 4 of you could go on all these different iconic maps, battle each other, beat each other up, knock each other off the stage, and see who's going to be left standing. You can never go wrong with Super Smash Bros. It's still one of the best fighting games. Some people call it like a fighting game. I guess it's kind of a fighting game, but kind of like a basher game, or at least in my opinion. Just, it's not too violent. Or it can be violent in some cases. Yeah. So yeah, I go with Super Smash Bros. For number 4 on my list. Going into number 3. Has to go to my favorite Star Wars game on the Nintendo 64, and easily could be considered a top 5 favorite Star Wars game of all time, if not top 10. But it has to go to Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Now, if you had a blast playing the opening Hoth battle on Shadows of the Empire, imagine if they made an entire game around a flight simulator where you take control of iconic Star Wars ships and battle each other on different missions. Well, Rogue Squadron is for you. This game was amazing. Visually, it was impressive. It had a plot. It had all these iconic ships that you had seen in the films, including ships that hadn't come out yet. I think there's a bunch of different passwords that you could look up that would give you access to certain ships that you could use to do certain missions. Different variety of objectives. Sometimes you had to take down just certain enemy forces. Some stages you had to protect people. Then you had to take certain buildings down, take locations. It's just great variety of different missions. I never got a chance to play the sequel, which came out on the GameCube. That's like one of the all-time great Star Wars games that I never got a chance to play, that I really wish I could go back and replay it because it looked awesome. But it all started with Rogue Squadron. Still one of the greatest Star Wars games of all time. Can't complain, which is why I'm happy to make it number 3 on my list. Going on to number 2. Gotta go with, obviously it's gotta go GoldenEye. This is kind of one of the few times where a lot of people either, like, personally, GoldenEye is, like, my favorite James Bond film of all time. It was the first James Bond film of all time. So to have a game connected to it and be almost as iconic as the film, I think it's a major plus. It followed the plot of the movie reasonably well. But I think most people remember this for being as iconic as it was because of the multiplayer. This was perhaps one of the few times. This was long before Halo, came out. So to have like 4-player, like shooting each other in all these different iconic locations in GoldenEye was a massive treat. I spent God knows how many hours playing this game. I think they tried to remake it on a future console, I think, but it didn't work out quite as well. But yeah, GoldenEye is still iconic. It's still one of the all-time greatest shooters of all time, and it really was one of the first games that kind of pioneered the multiplayer first-person shooter combat. I think Doom tried to do that a little bit before, but I don't think it had anywhere near as success as GoldenEye, which is why I have to put it as number 2 on my list. Now, number 1. Obviously, some of you guys probably know what it's going to be, but it has to, of course, have to go to Super Mario 64. This was the first Super Nintendo. It was a launch title. Show off what the Nintendo 64 could do. It is still my favorite Mario game of all time. I would even go so far as to say it's like the last newest Mario game that I ever actually got a chance to play all the way through. Still iconic. I can't say enough. I spoke enough about it in my last Mario video. So, Mario 64. One of the greatest games of all time. 10 out of 10. Favorite Mario game of all time. You guys know why. So that is going to conclude my list of my top 10 favorite Super Nintendo 64 games of all time. What are your top 10 favorite Nintendo 64 games of all time? Let me know in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.